In a forgotten corner of the galaxy, where rusted ships limp to die, a human mechanic with grease-stained hands pulled two alien women from a burning wreck. He asked for nothing, expected less, and returned to his tools before the smoke cleared. But the next morning, the sky tore open, and an armada descended like the fist of a god, because the sisters he saved were not refugees. They were royalty, and their father had come to repay a debt the mechanic never knew he was owed. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is even more unbelievable than this one. The salvage yard stretched across the barren moon like a graveyard of ambition. Broken hulls lay half-buried in red dust, their metal bones picked clean by scavengers and time. Above, the twin suns bled orange into violet, painting the horizon with the colors of endings. And somewhere in that dying light, a man named Jakob Wren tightened a bolt on a fuel compressor that hadn't worked in 20 years but might, with enough stubbornness, live again. He did not hear the crash at first. The wind carried strange songs across the wastes, howling through hollow ships and twisted scaffolding. But then came the sound that didn't belong, a shriek of metal tearing through atmosphere, followed by the deep thunder of impact. Jakob looked up, wrench still in hand, and saw the smoke rising 3 kilometers west. Black and thick, it coiled into the sky like a serpent made of ash. He didn't think. Thinking was for people with choices. He grabbed his medkit, a fire suppressor that weighed more than it should, and ran. His boots kicked up dust that hadn't been disturbed in months. The wreckage came into view quickly, a sleek vessel split open like fruit dropped from a great height. Flames licked the interior, hungry and impatient, and inside, through the smoke and the heat, he saw them, 2 figures, slumped against twisted seats, their skin shimmering faintly in shades he had no name for. Jakob didn't hesitate. He climbed into the wreck, the heat searing his lungs, and dragged the first one out. She was lighter than she looked, her body angular and graceful in ways that defied human proportion. Her eyes fluttered open, irises like cracked amethyst, and she tried to speak. He shook his head. "Save it," he said, and went back for the second. The flames were worse now, angrier. The ship groaned, ready to collapse. Jakob pulled the second woman free, just as the hull buckled inward, spitting sparks and molten debris. He laid them both on the dust, far enough from the fire, and opened his kit. His hands moved with the precision of someone who had fixed more machines than people, but understood that both required care. He sealed burns with foam, stabilized fractures with polymer wraps, and poured water between cracked lips. The sisters, though he didn't know they were sisters yet, watched him with wide eyes. One tried to reach for his hand, but he pulled away gently. "Rest," he said. "You're safe now." And before they could answer, before they could ask his name or offer gratitude, Jakob Wren stood, gathered his tools, and walked back into the graveyard of ships. He had work to finish before the suns fully set. Jakob woke to a sound that didn't belong. Not wind, not the groan of settling metal, but something deeper, a hum that vibrated through the ground and up into his bones. He rolled off the narrow cot in his workshop, pulled on boots still caked with yesterday's dust, and stepped outside. The sky was wrong. Where twin suns should have been climbing toward zenith, there was only shadow. Ships, hundreds of them, descending in formation like birds of prey made from light and steel. They were sleek, impossibly large, their hulls carved with symbols that seemed to shift and breathe. The largest vessel hung at the center, a cathedral of polished obsidian that drank the morning and gave back only darkness. Jakob stood frozen, wrench still gripped in one hand, as the armada landed around his salvage yard. The ground trembled, dust rose in plumes, and then the doors opened. Soldiers poured out, their armor crystalline and sharp, refracting light into 1,000 hostile colors. They moved with precision, forming a perimeter around Jakob's workshop. Weapons hummed, energy coiling at their tips like caged lightning. Jakob's heart kicked against his ribs, but he didn't run. There was nowhere to run. He simply stood there, alone, in a sea of armed strangers, and waited. The largest ship opened last. A ramp extended, smooth as silk, and a figure emerged, tall, impossibly tall, draped in robes that seemed woven from starlight itself. His skin was a deep violet, almost black, and his eyes burned gold. A crown of living metal sat upon his brow, shifting and pulsing with a rhythm older than any machine Jacob had ever repaired. The soldiers parted. The figure descended the ramp, each step deliberate, each movement carrying the weight of galaxies. Jacob tightened his grip on the wrench. It was a ridiculous thing, a child's toy against the might before him. But it was all he had. The alien king, for that was what he had to be, stopped 3 meters away. His gaze swept over Jacob, cataloging every detail. The grease-stained clothes, the calloused hands, the quiet defiance in eyes that had seen too much loneliness to fear death properly. "You," the king said, his voice like thunder wrapped in velvet. "You are the one who saved my daughters." Jacob blinked. Daughters. The 2 women from the wreck. He hadn't known, hadn't asked. The king's eyes narrowed, searching for something. An explanation, a motive, a demand for payment. But Jacob only shrugged, the wrench still dangling from his hand. "They needed help," he said simply. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind held its breath. The soldiers shifted, uncertain. And the king, ruler of systems Jacob couldn't name, stared at the human mechanic as if seeing something impossible. Slowly, deliberately, the king lowered himself to one knee. The motion sent ripples through the ranks, gasps, whispers. The clatter of weapons nearly dropped. Because their leader, their god-king, was kneeling before a man who smelled of engine oil and had never asked for anything. The king remained kneeling, and the world seemed to tilt on an axis Jacob didn't understand. Behind the towering figure, soldiers exchanged glances, their crystalline armor catching the light like fractured prisms. Some lowered their weapons slightly, confusion rippling through their ranks. Others tightened their grips, as if this display of humility was a threat they couldn't name. Jacob didn't move. He'd learned long ago that stillness was sometimes the only language worth speaking. "Stand up," Jacob said quietly. "You don't need to do that." The king's golden eyes lifted, studying him with an intensity that felt like being weighed on scales forged from suns. "In my culture," the king said, his voice carrying across the silent yard, "a life debt is sacred. You saved my daughters without asking their names, their worth, or what payment they could offer. Such an act demands acknowledgement." He rose slowly, towering over Jacob once more. "Tell me, human, what is your price?" Jacob shifted the wrench to his other hand, feeling its familiar weight. "There is no price," he said. "They were hurt. I helped. That's all." A murmur swept through the soldiers, a sound like wind through metal chimes. The king's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Confusion, perhaps, or disbelief. "You expect nothing?" he asked. "I expect to get back to work," Jacob replied. "I've got a compressor that won't fix itself." The king turned to one of his advisors, a thin figure draped in robes of deep crimson. They spoke in a language that sounded like water running over glass, quick and sharp. The advisor's face twisted into something between incredulity and offense. He gestured toward Jacob, his movements sharp, accusatory. The king raised a hand, silencing him. "My advisor believes you mock us," the king said, turning back to Jacob. "That your refusal is an insult wrapped in false humility." Jacob met his gaze without flinching. "I'm not mocking anyone. I just don't need anything from you." "Everyone needs something," the king said, stepping closer. "Gold, land, power, name it, and it is yours." Jacob looked past him, toward the rows of ships, the soldiers standing at attention, the machinery of an empire condensed into his tiny corner of nowhere. He thought about what he could ask for. A new workshop, credits enough to leave this moon, a ship of his own. But those things felt hollow, like trying to fill a hole with shadows. "I don't want your gold," he said finally. "And I don't need your land. I just want to be left alone." The words hit, like a stone dropped into still water. The king stared at him, and for the first time, something other than authority crossed his face. Respect, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. Behind them, two figures emerged from the largest ship. The sisters, walking slowly, their movements graceful despite lingering injuries. They stopped beside their father, their eyes fixed on Jakob. The sisters stood beside their father, and Jakob saw them properly for the first time. In the firelight and smoke of the wreck, they had been shapes, broken things that needed fixing. Now, in the cold morning light, they were something else entirely. Their skin shimmered like oil on water, shifting between shades of blue and violet. Their eyes, those cracked amethyst irises, held depth that seemed to contain entire nebulas. They wore simple garments, provided by the ship's medical bay, but carried themselves with the weight of crowns unseen. The taller of the two stepped forward. "I am Kiravin," she said, her voice soft but clear. "And this is my sister, Solveig. We owe you our lives." Jakob shifted his weight, uncomfortable under so many eyes. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "I did what anyone would do." Solveig, the younger sister, shook her head slowly. "But they wouldn't have," she said. "We crashed on 17 moons before this one. No one came. No one even looked." Her voice carried no bitterness, only the flat truth of experience. "You came. You asked nothing. That makes you rare." The king's jaw tightened, and Jakob saw something dangerous flicker across his face. Not anger at Jakob, but at a universe that had ignored his daughter's suffering. "This is why the debt must be honored," the king said, his voice hard as iron. "To refuse my gratitude wounds my honor. It suggests my daughter's lives are not worth repaying." Jakob ran a hand through his hair, feeling the grit of dust and exhaustion. "That's not what I'm saying at all," he replied. "Your daughter's lives are worth everything. But I didn't save them for a reward. I saved them because it was right. Taking payment would make it something else. Something smaller." The advisor from before stepped forward, his crimson robes swirling. "This human speaks in riddles," he hissed. "He refuses our king's generosity and calls it virtue. It is an insult, dressed as philosophy." He turned to the soldiers. Perhaps we should remind him that refusing a king carries consequences." The tension crackled like static before a storm. Hands moved toward weapons. The king's expression darkened, but before anyone could act, Kiravin raised her hand. The gesture was small, almost delicate, but it carried absolute authority. The soldiers froze. Even the advisor stepped back, though his face remained twisted with resentment. "Father," Kiravin said, turning to the king, "perhaps gratitude looks different in different worlds. Perhaps this human's honor is measured not by what he takes, but by what he refuses." She glanced at Jakob, something like understanding, passing between them. "We came here seeking to repay a debt, but maybe what we need is to understand the man we are indebted to." The king stood silent for a long moment, the wind tugging at his robes. Finally, he nodded. "Very well," he said. "We will stay. We will learn. And then, Jakob Wren, you will accept what is owed." The king did not leave. His armada settled into the dust, like monuments carved from the sky itself, their hulls gleaming against the rust and ruin of Jakob's salvage yard. Soldiers established a perimeter, their movements efficient and silent. Engineers erected structures that unfolded like metallic flowers, creating shelters and command posts where only emptiness had been before. And through it all, Jakob watched from his workshop doorway, wrench still in hand, wondering what he'd gotten himself into. The king appeared at midday, alone except for his daughters. He'd shed the elaborate robes, wearing instead something simpler, though no less regal. He stopped at the edge of Jakob's workspace, studying the scattered tools, the half-repaired machines, the organized chaos of a life built around survival. "Show me," the king said. "Show me your work." Jakob hesitated. This felt like a test, though he didn't know what answers were expected. Finally, he shrugged and led them inside. The workshop was small, cluttered with salvaged parts and makeshift repairs. Oil stains darkened the floor. The air smelled of burned metal and old coffee. Jakob gestured toward the fuel compressor he'd been working on for months. "This is from a cargo hauler that crashed 15 years ago," he said. "The compression chamber cracked, but the core's still good. I'm trying to rebuild it." The king knelt beside the machine, his long fingers tracing the welded seams. "You work alone," he observed. "Always have," Jakob replied. "Not many humans out here, and the ones who pass through don't usually stop to chat." Kiravin moved through the workshop, her eyes cataloging everything. She paused at a shelf lined with journals, their pages filled with diagrams and notes. "You document your work," she said. "Have to," Jakob said. "Memory's not perfect. Write it down, and it stays fixed." He watched her flip through one of the journals, her expression thoughtful. "Why are you really here?" he asked. "Not just to watch me turn wrenches." The king stood, dust on his knees. "Because I do not understand you," he said simply. "In my empire, every action carries expectation. Loyalty is purchased, service is rewarded. But you operate outside that system. It troubles me." "Troubles you how?" Jakob asked. "Because if one human can act without expectation of reward," the king said slowly, "then perhaps I have built my empire on foundations that are less solid than I believed." He looked around the workshop, at the poverty and the pride intertwined. "You have nothing, yet you give freely. I have everything, yet I must bargain for loyalty." Solveig spoke then, her voice quiet. "Father sees weakness in our court, advisors who serve only for status, generals who fight only for glory. But you, Jakob Wren, you saved us simply because we needed saving. That purity of purpose is what he cannot understand, and what he needs to learn." Jakob set down his wrench. "I'm not that complicated," he said. "I'm just a mechanic." The king smiled, and it was sad and knowing. "That," he said, "is precisely what makes you dangerous." The days passed like water through cupped hands, slow but inevitable. The king remained, observing Jakob's routines with the patience of someone accustomed to waiting for stars to align. They shared meals. Simple things Jakob cooked on a plasma burner that sputtered more than it heated. The sisters helped him sort salvage, their elegant hands learning the language of rust and repair. Trust, fragile as spider silk, began to weave itself between worlds. But not everyone was pleased. In the command ship, where corridors gleamed with polished intent, the advisor named Torvin paced like a caged predator. His crimson robes whispered against the floor as he moved, and his eyes, pale as winter moons, burned with resentment. Around him, 3 other council members sat in shadow, their faces obscured by the dim light. "This human diminishes us," Torvin hissed. "Our king kneels in the dirt, learning to wield primitive tools while the Empire watches. How long before they question his strength?" One of the figures leaned forward, voice like gravel scraped over stone. "The king has always been eccentric. But this obsession with the mechanic threatens more than pride. It threatens stability." "Agreed," said another, their tone measured and cold. "If word spreads that a penniless human can refuse our king's gratitude and live, what message does that send to our subjugated worlds? That defiance carries no consequence. That honor is negotiable." Torvin stopped pacing, his hands, thin and sharp-jointed, curled into fists. "The mechanic is a symbol now," he said. "A symbol of everything weak and sentimental in our king's recent reign. Remove the symbol, and the king returns to clarity." "You speak of assassination," the gravelly voice said. "That is no small thing." "I speak of correction," Torvin replied. "The human will die. An accident, perhaps. A malfunction in his workshop. The sisters will grieve, the king will mourn, and then life will return to proper order. The Empire does not bend to the whims of scavengers." Silence settled over them, heavy and deliberate. Finally, the third figure spoke, their voice smooth as oil. "And if we are discovered?" Torvin smiled, and it was a blade wrapped in silk. "Then we were zealots acting alone, misguided by loyalty. The king will condemn us, execute us if he must, but the mechanic will still be dead, and the Empire will be reminded that sentiment is a luxury we cannot afford." The others nodded slowly, one by one. Agreement forged in shadow and sealed with silence. Torvin turned toward the viewport, staring out at the salvage yard below. He could see Jakob moving between the wrecks, the king and his daughters walking beside him. It looked almost peaceful, almost like something worth preserving. But peace, Torvin knew, was just another word for weakness. Outside, beneath the alien stars, Kiravin paused mid-step. She tilted her head, listening to something her sister couldn't hear. A vibration in the air, a shift in pressure, the feeling of eyes watching from places they shouldn't be. She glanced back toward the command ship, its dark hull looming against the sky, and felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. Trouble was coming. Jakob woke to darkness and the smell of smoke, not the clean smoke of a controlled burn, but something chemical, acrid, wrong. He rolled from his cot, instinct overriding confusion, and his hand found the wrench he kept beside his bed. The workshop door hung open, though he'd locked it hours before. Wind carried ash through the threshold, and beyond, shadows moved with purpose. He stepped outside into chaos. His salvage yard burned in 3 places, flames licking up through gutted hulls like hungry tongues. Figures moved between the wrecks, their armor matte black, designed to swallow light rather than reflect it. Not the king's soldiers. These moved differently, with the fluid precision of predators bred for killing. Jakob counted 6, maybe 7, all converging on his position. The first one reached him before he could retreat. A blade materialized from shadow, humming with energy, and Jakob barely twisted aside. The edge kissed his shoulder, splitting fabric and skin in a line of fire. He swung the wrench on instinct, connecting with the assassin's wrist. Bone cracked. The blade clattered to the ground, but the others were already closing in. Then, the night exploded with violet light. Kiravin appeared from nowhere, her body moving like water given lethal purpose. She struck the nearest assassin with an open palm, and he flew backward, armor crumpling like paper. Solveig materialized beside her sister, wielding a staff of crystallized energy that sang as it cut through the air. 2 more assassins fell before they could raise their weapons. "Get behind us," Kiravin commanded, not looking at Jakob. Her voice carried no room for argument. Jakob stumbled backward as the sisters formed a barrier between him and death. The remaining assassins regrouped, circling like wolves reassessing prey. One raised a weapon, something that crackled with contained lightning. Before he could fire, a roar split the night. The king descended from the command ship on wings of pure light, his form terrible and radiant. He landed with enough force to crater the ground, and the shockwave knocked 3 assassins off their feet. "Traitors," the king said, and his voice was the sound of worlds ending. "You dare attack under my protection?" The assassins didn't answer. They simply activated devices on their belts, and their bodies began to shimmer. Teleportation signatures. They were running. But the king was faster. He moved with impossible speed, his hands blurring as he caught 2 assassins mid-vanish and dragged them back into reality. They screamed as his grip burned through their armor. The others flickered out of existence, escaping into whatever darkness had birthed them. Silence crashed down like a fallen sky. The king held the 2 surviving assassins by their throats, his eyes blazing gold. "Who sent you?" he demanded. One assassin managed to laugh, blood bubbling between broken teeth. "You've grown soft, my king," he rasped. "The Empire sees it. We merely act on what everyone knows." The king's grip tightened. The assassin's laughter cut off. Jakob stepped forward, his shoulder bleeding but his voice steady. "Don't," he said. "Killing them proves their point." The king turned, and for a moment Jakob saw something ancient and furious in those golden eyes. Then it faded, replaced by something harder to name, control, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. The king released the assassins, letting them crumple to the ground. "Bind them," he told his soldiers. Morning came reluctant and gray, the twin suns hidden behind clouds that looked like bruises. Jakob sat on the steps of his workshop, a bandage wrapped around his shoulder, watching the king's soldiers dismantle the evidence of last night's violence. The burned wrecks had been extinguished, the bodies removed. but the stain of it remained, settling into the dust like oil that would never wash clean. The king approached alone, his footsteps heavy with more than weight. He sat beside Jakob, an impossibly tall figure folding itself onto steps built for smaller beings. For a long time, neither spoke. They simply watched the salvage yard wake to a day that felt different from all the ones before it. "I interrogated them through the night," the king said finally. "Torvin orchestrated it. 3 council members supported him. They believed killing you would restore what they called proper order." He paused, and something bitter crossed his face. "They believed I had grown weak." Jakob prodded at his bandage, testing the pain. "Maybe they're right," he said. The king's head snapped toward him. "You think showing mercy is weakness?" "I think," Jakob said carefully, "that ruling an empire and fixing machines are probably pretty different. What works for me out here might not work for you out there." He gestured vaguely toward the stars. The king was silent, considering. "They are still my subjects. I cannot simply forgive treason." "I'm not asking you to," Jakob replied. "I'm just saying that what happened last night, that's on me. They came after me because I wouldn't take your reward, because I made things complicated." He met the king's gaze. "Maybe it's time I stopped complicating things." Before the king could respond, the sisters appeared. Kiravin moved with purpose, Solveig trailing behind, with something like sadness in her eyes. They stopped before Jakob and their father, forming a triangle of unspoken tension. "Father told us what he intends to offer," Kiravin said. "One final choice." The king stood, towering once more. "Jakob Wren," he said formally, and the words carried weight like stones placed on scales. "I offer you sanctuary among my people, a position of honor, wealth beyond measure. You would never be alone again, never dismissed or forgotten. Come with us to the capital world and be recognized for what you are." Jakob looked at them, these impossible beings who had crashed into his life and refused to leave. He thought about the offer, a real home, people who saw him, purpose beyond surviving another day in the rust. It should have been easy. It should have been everything he'd ever wanted without knowing he wanted it. But he thought about crowds and ceremonies, about being watched constantly, measured against expectations he'd never asked for, about losing the quiet that had been both his prison and his peace. "And if I say no?" he asked. Solveig stepped forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then we leave. We return to our empire, and you return to your work. But Jakob, please understand. You saved our lives. We would be honored to share ours with you." Jakob stood slowly, feeling every year of loneliness pressing against his chest. He looked at each of them in turn. The king, powerful and confused. The sisters, hopeful and genuine. Good people, all of them. Jakob walked to the edge of his workshop, where the salvage yard stretched into the horizon like a sea of broken dreams. The wind carried dust across metal bones, the same wind that had carried him through 1,000 lonely mornings. He felt their eyes on his back, waiting for an answer that would change everything or nothing at all. Finally, he turned. "I can't go with you," he said, and the words felt both right and terrible. "I'm not made for palaces or ceremonies. I'm made for this." He gestured at the wrecks, the tools, the small corner of nowhere he'd claimed as his own. "But that doesn't mean I don't value what you're offering." The king's expression hardened, a door closing. "Then we are at an impasse. My honor demands repayment. Your nature refuses it. Where does that leave us?" "It leaves us here," Jakob said. "As friends, if you'll have me. Not as debtor and king, but as people who helped each other when it mattered." He looked at the sisters. "You gave me something I didn't know I needed. Company. Proof that maybe I'm not as invisible as I thought. That's worth more than gold." Kiravin smiled, and it was like watching ice melt into spring. "Father," she said softly, turning to the king, "what if honor isn't about grand gestures? What if it's about this? Respecting his choice, even when it confounds us? The king stood rigid, every line of his body speaking resistance, but slowly, something shifted. His shoulders lowered, his hands unclenched. He looked at Jakob with eyes that held centuries of tradition warring against something newer, something fragile. "You would make an ally of a king?" he asked. "Not a subject, but an equal?" "I'd make a friend," Jakob corrected, "if the king can set aside being a king for long enough to shake a mechanic's hand." The moment stretched like metal under stress, ready to either hold or snap. Then the king stepped forward and extended his hand. Not the formal gesture of royalty, but something simpler. Human, almost. Jakob took it, their grips firm, and something unspoken passed between them. An agreement forged not in law or ceremony, but in mutual recognition. "Very well," the king said. "We will return to our empire. But you will not be forgotten, Jakob Wren." He released Jakob's hand and turned to his soldiers. "Bring the beacon." 2 soldiers approached, carrying between them a device that hummed with soft blue light. It was the size of a fist, carved from what looked like living crystal. The king took it and placed it in Jakob's hands. "This is a quantum relay," he explained. "Activate it, and we will hear you across any distance. You will never be alone again, not truly. And should you ever need us, we will come." Jakob held the beacon, feeling its warmth pulse against his palms. "I don't know what to say." Solveig stepped forward and embraced him, careful of his injured shoulder. "Say you'll remember us," she whispered. "Say we mattered." "You mattered," Jakob said, and meant it with everything he had. Kiravin joined the embrace, and for a moment the 3 of them stood together under alien stars, bridging the vast distance between worlds with nothing but care. The armada lifted at dawn, their engines singing hymns that shook dust from ancient metal. Jakob stood in his salvage yard, one hand shading his eyes, the other holding the beacon against his chest. The ships rose like titans, shedding gravity's chains, their hulls catching the twin suns until they blazed like newborn stars. Higher they climbed, through clouds and atmosphere, until they were simply lights fading into the vast indifference of space. And then they were gone. The silence that followed was different from the silence before. Not empty, but full, weighted with memory and possibility. Jakob returned to his workshop, set the beacon on a shelf where he could see it, and picked up his wrench. The fuel compressor still waited, patient as stone. He knelt beside it, testing connections, tightening bolts, losing himself in the familiar rhythm of work. But something had changed. The loneliness didn't press quite so hard anymore. 3 days later, the first ship arrived. Not a warship, but a trader's vessel, small and practical. The captain was a Veilari, her skin glowing with bioluminescent patterns. She landed carefully, respectfully, and approached Jakob with a container of rare alloys. "The king sent word," she explained, "about the mechanic who asks for nothing. I thought perhaps you could use quality materials." She wouldn't accept payment, no matter how Jakob insisted. She simply smiled, wished him well, and departed. More came after. Engineers seeking advice on problems their technology couldn't solve. Merchants offering fair trades. Families stopping to rest, their children playing among the wrecks, while parents shared meals Jakob cooked on his sputtering burner. The salvage yard, once a graveyard for forgotten things, became something else, a crossroads, a place where different worlds met and found common ground in grease and honesty. Jakob worked through it all, fixing what was broken, teaching those who wanted to learn. He didn't charge much, never more than what seemed fair. Some paid in credits, others in stories or spare parts. A young human girl, traveling with her alien foster family, spent an entire afternoon watching him repair a nav computer. "How do you know what's wrong?" she asked. Jakob smiled. "You listen," he said. "Everything broken is trying to tell you something." Months passed, like chapters in a book he was writing without knowing the plot. The beacon hummed quietly on its shelf, never activated, but always there. A reminder that somewhere beyond the stars, a king ruled with slightly more wisdom, and 2 sisters remembered the mechanic who had asked for nothing. Jakob wondered sometimes if he'd made the right choice, if he should have gone with them, embraced a life less solitary. But then he'd look around at his workshop, at the people who came and went, at the small community forming in the unlikeliest of places, and the doubt would fade. One evening, as the twin suns painted the sky in their familiar oranges and violets, Jakob sat on his workshop steps and watched ships come and go. A Threxian freighter, a human courier, an alien family in a vessel held together more by hope than engineering. Each one stopping, if only briefly, at the salvage yard on the forgotten moon, at the place where a mechanic had once pulled two strangers from fire and changed the course of empires without meaning to. The beacon pulsed softly, its blue light steady as a heartbeat. Jakob picked up his wrench, tested its weight, and smiled. Tomorrow there would be more work, more people, more connections forged in the space between loneliness and belonging, and that, he thought, was worth more than all the gold in all the galaxies combined.